Growing up, my mom, I mean, she's my warrior. She did an amazing job fighting depression, raising 3 children, also having a daughter still at home that dealt with abuse, you know, and walking me through that. She was amazing. She soldiered through it. But me now, standing where I stand, looking back, I see the evidence of the depression. I see the bouts where she couldn't function, you know what I mean? But I always saw her get up. You know what I mean? Which I think that empowers my journey because I always saw mama get up, you know, but I do see the evidence of it. And then later on talking to her, she talked about how there were periods where she was on medication and things like that. So I think it's just, I definitely see it, you know.
Yeah, I think that's very important that you talked about the reflection of that conversation. Sometimes I know parents can feel guilt for things that they didn't really understand years back. But those conversations, they're still important to have because healing can still occur. When I, just similar to you, in dealing with my mom, my family also, my siblings had a history of mental illness. Schizophrenia was in our family, and my oldest brother died when I was pretty young. I was 12 years old, and that's when I really started noticing my mom like spiral into the depression. And because there was no conversation around the grief of dealing with that and also the mental illness that was there, I didn't know how to help her then. But years later, when we really bonded and started talking and having these conversations, I understood so much more, and it allowed some healing to happen that I needed to happen because I was able to understand her journey. I understand why she wasn't able to share because she didn't know. She didn't have services to help her along that journey, and that really made an impact. And so I just want to echo, and as I speak out to the audience today and understand, if you are a parent and you are contemplating, you know, and thinking about, man, there are things that I have done in the past that I'm not happy about, that I wasn't able to talk about, it's never too late to have those conversations because your child still needs some answers that they may not know how to come to you with. And if you're that child, then I want to encourage you to open the dialogue. You may have to be the one to go to your parent and share what's been going on in a loving way, so that you can start that conversation and allow that healing to finally occur. Yeah. Minister Latoya, would you like to chime in?
I can definitely say that that's been something similar for me with my relationship with my father. I know I've seen so many members of my family deal with alcoholism, and especially my dad before he passed away. I mean, he had stopped, but by then the damage was already done. But it wasn't until we had conversations about what happened to him as a child that I came into an understanding that he was simply trying to cope with what he had dealt with. He was trying to cope with the things that he had to go through. But I remember being so hard on my dad because I felt like he was not a nice person when he was just trying to cope and he was just trying to make it through. He was doing the best that he could. But it wasn't until conversations took place, and it wasn't even between myself and my father, it was me and my aunt, and she was telling me what it was like when they grew up, and it opened my eyes. And it made me stop. I was an adult at this time. It made me stop and start to think on myself and how I was responding to him negatively when I should have been more compassionate about the fact, well, of course, as a child, you don't know that your parents are going through these things. And so you do tend to either retaliate or you pick up what they do. I chose not to take on alcohol. I swore myself from I was a kid that I would not drink, and I haven't, simply because I saw what it did to my family. But the anger that he had, I picked that up. You know, the sadness that he used anger to cover his sadness. And I definitely picked up that trait along the way. And it's amazing, you don't stop to think that as a parent, I mean, we're all parents. As a parent, you're not sure, you're not even aware that you're passing it along to your kids because they're watching and they're observing that this is how you cope, so I guess this is the right way to be because we're their example. And it brings me back to how strong and important it is for community. For community to step in. Because when you were speaking, I said, I wonder if there were any men around that could have stirred you another way or, you know, led you into a different path. Or even when you were younger, before your supervisor may have stepped in and said something to you, maybe as a kid, you know, that highlights how important community is.
I definitely did have that. I think the first time I was ever on the show, Pastor Coffey mentioned the, the
Destiny Helper.
Destiny Helper.
My Destiny Helper was Michael Dewberry, and he was my neighbor, and he was very much imperfect. But what he did, what he tried to do was helped me understand that I was different than my circumstances, that I wasn't, I was, something was in me and I was destined to be something greater than my circumstances. And I didn't understand and appreciate it as a kid because, bro, you know, my dad, you know, and I'm watching his imperfections instead of hearing what he was trying to pour into me, because his imperfections were probably a byproduct of his mental health issues or his coping skills. But I always hear his teachings of being a community servant and being an example for, you know, my peers and people who are around me all the time. And that's what I try to do as much as I can. That's what led me to being what I consider myself now as a mental health advocate, where it's the fact that it's my responsibility to take my circumstances, take the things that I've been through, and teach other people. So definitely my community, which was led by Michael Dewberry, played a big part in where I am today.
That's so vital. Tamara, how about you? Was there a community that supported you along your journey?
I would say that later on in life, but as a teenager, you know, it's very frowned upon to admit, you know, that you had these issues. It was frowned. I grew up in the country, so it's very frowned upon to admit that these type of things took place in your home. And so my family, we really for a long time lived under the cloak of silence. And so for me, it caused me to really reject my mom, and which I will always say she was probably one of my biggest advocates, but I rejected her. I saw the things that she was going through, so I began to reject her. But I rejected her from the standpoint of, I felt like it was because I saw that she was hurting and I felt like I didn't protect her. Then I felt like I needed to take myself out of the equation. And so I began to live this wild life. I began to run from her. I left home at 15. And so, but what we later on in recent years, probably last 3 or 4 years, what me and my mom have discovered is that there were conversations that we needed to have, like y'all talked about. There were conversations that needed to be had. There were things that I was operating in. Even though me and my mom had come back together, we had reconciled, there was still a level of distance between us because of conversations that needed to take place. Those hard conversations. I needed to admit some things that I was feeling to her so that she could then give me the answers that I needed as her daughter. And then there were some things that as her daughter, why did you respond that way to me? Why did you leave home at 15? I wanted to raise you, you know? And there were some things that I needed to let her know that I was feeling. And what happened is that curse that the enemy was trying to implement with us was then broken. It was broken through communication. So it's important to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's good. I just want to highlight something you shared to the audience, the importance of two-way effective communication. A lot of times when I heard words feeling rejected, when we're angry about what's happened, it masks what's really going on. It masks the pain. It masks the hurt that we're really experiencing. And what happens is we see the actions, we see the rejection, we see the running away, we see the behavior, and we don't really call or identify the hurt. We don't know how to get to the root of that part of it. And so I just want to encourage everyone about the importance of not just talking, but listening. And listening happens in different ways, right? We don't just listen to the words that we hear. We can listen to actions. We can listen to behaviors. We can listen to facial expression. There's so much that we have to be in tune in. How do we avoid, and this is a question that I'll kind of maybe pose to Victor and Tamara, how do you avoid being too busy to have these conversations? I know with parents that, you know, my mom had to work a lot, and so there wasn't really availability there to have those conversations. But I would be curious to know from your perspective, if you have a busy parent that's not necessarily available, how can you have time to have those conversations? What would you encourage the audience?
I would encourage you to look at it like a matter of life and death. Right, when you make it that serious and you don't downplay the severity of having these conversations and identifying if your loved one is suffering from mental health issues, you have to look at it like it's a matter of life and death. And again, because for a lot of people, it's that close. right? And it just takes the one thing. It takes that one reminder that you don't matter, or that you're better off somewhere else. It takes that one reminder to push that person over the edge. And a lot of times you'll see the signs as actually the cry for help. So what I always tell people is listen with your eyes, right? Because when you hear stuff, it kind of gets monotone after a while, and it gets muffled, and you're like, yeah, whatever. But when you start listening with your eyes and starting to see the changes, the subtle changes and the cries for help, then you can really start having that two-way conversation. Especially as a parent, my responsibility, culturally, you're taught to have a hierarchy and establish a hierarchy. Like, I'm the dad, so you just do what I say. And I don't care how you feel, you just fall in line with my structure and my order. And that's fine, but while you're trying to establish this hierarchy, was really called structure, right? When you're trying to establish a structure, you need to understand that this is a human being that you're dealing with, right? And they're not, even though I want my sons to be like me so bad, they're not like me. My sons aren't athletic, right? You know what I'm saying? They don't have an athletic bone in their body. So that right there alone sets them apart from me. And I have to recognize we have differences, but we're so much alike as well, in a sense that we all deal with the world and individual struggles. And it could be costly if I don't have that conversation and listen with my eyes to my kids.
Yeah, that's so good. I just want to repeat that, to listen with your eyes. I love that because there's so much that you can see beyond what you hear and what's in front of you when you take the time to do that. So thank you.
Yep.
Tamara, how about you?
I think the one word that came to mind for me was intentional. Is that we have to be intentional with especially with the people around us, those that God has entrusted to us. We have to be intentional. And I think that even as a mom, I do a lot, you know what I mean? And so I think one of the biggest things that I have adopted is just being intentional. If that means that 5 minutes that I have, that I'm driving you somewhere, I'm asking you, I'm posing a question, those few moments that we may have together, we treasure those moments. We make those moments count. You know what I mean? So for me, it's being intentional and making every moment count. And if you see something, not allowing that thing to fester. If that means that, I may have to take a half day today, be intentional, but put the priority on the priority. You know what I mean? So if that means I have to take a half day to address the behavioral issues that's going on with my children, I think that was one of the biggest things when I was growing up and going through what I was going through, that my mom was very busy. She was a single mom. And so she was very busy. And so oftentimes that rejection would come when I would make an outcry and wouldn't receive that moment or that time that I needed to address how I was feeling. Rejection, by the time it was addressed, rejection had set in, the wall done set in. I got my guards up and I can't, get the answers that I need. But had my mom had the knowledge that I have now, she would have known that, okay, I needed to stop and put the priority on the priority and give the attention to what needs the attention. You know what I mean? That, you can always make $1, but if your child is not here, you can't get that child back. And so we have to put the priority where the priority is.
Yeah, that's good. Be intentional. Yeah. I love that. Minister Latoya, is there anything you'd like to share?
When you were speaking, I thought of the fact that you had to recognize first that being busy can also be a way to avoid what needs to be done. Sometimes we make ourselves so busy that we avoid it and say it's just a phase, it'll go away, or they'll grow out of it, or it's just temporary. But sometimes we have to recognize that the busyness is a form of avoidance for the issue that we're facing. Even within ourselves, we keep ourselves busy to distract us from what we might be dealing with. And sometimes we keep ourselves busy to distract us from what's going on in our family or what's right in front of us. Listen with your eyes and be intentional. Those are two things that you guys have put in place. That's practical tools that can be used to stop the busyness and say, you know what? They're saying something, or my kid is telling me something right now, and I need to really pay attention to that and stop the busyness as a form of avoidance for the issue that is right in front of me.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I had a situation with my son, my oldest son, and in the moment, like I talked about this hierarchy, right? And I'm dad, so I'm trying to establish my dominance, right? Because my son, he's trying to test my manhood, and we're going back and forward. And I so love what you said about the stopping point. You know, and you do the same thing in healthcare where you stop the line. You stop the line and you check the site and you make sure everything is straight and then before you proceed. And it's the same thing I had to employ with my son because we were going at it. And I'm just all in the fight. I'm very confrontational like that where I do not run from a fight or an argument or a debate. And we're going back and forward and I'm just like, hold on, stop. Like this can't be it. Right? Like what's really going on, right? Because right now we're just kind of aggressive and we're being men and stuff like that. And we pounding on our chests and stuff. But it's not that, right? It's not me trying to be dad and you trying to be, that's not what so what's really the issue?
Yes.
And we talked.
Yeah.
And it's chilling now thinking about it because it was a turning point for us, and it revealed so much. Again, he understood that I wasn't too different from him, right? I'm just dad, right? And that comes with some other stuff that he's not prepared for, or he doesn't understand. But he understood very quickly. Well, dad's not much different from me, and I understood. Man, my son is just like me. You know what I'm saying? Like he's so much like me. This is the reason why he's doing this, and it helped us bridge that gap of that distance that we had. And me understanding how his mind works. Yeah. So now I know how to approach him, and now I know the signs to look for when he's shutting down or becoming more distant. So thank you for that. Definitely stopping.
And sometimes those stopping moments, they're silent moments. Sometimes it's just sitting together. You talked about your oldest son. It's something about them oldest sons. But with my oldest son, before he really got to a place to where he would open up to me and really talk to me about his feelings, and even with my mom, some of those moments where we were confronting some of the issues that we had, they were silent moments. It was just sitting there. It was just us sitting there together, being intentional, you know what I mean, about being in that moment together. Sometimes our children, they just need us to be present. Yeah. Like you said, we talked about being busy. Sometimes when they're used to us being so busy, they simply just need us to be present.
Yeah. Definitely.
You know, sometimes we have to build up to that the what's really going on coming out, because we don't want y'all to think that it's like just one moment, you know what I mean? No, these are several moments that when it finally came out, what's really going on, you know? But we had to be intentional. And some of those moments we just had to sit there in silence and just be there, be present, you know? Like with my oldest son, the breakthrough came with me just being there. Just being mindful, being present in the moment with him, Definitely. Just holding him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a very affectionate mom. Like, and so me just holding my son broke him. The tears began to fall. He began to release just at mama's embrace. But it was just me being there. My mom, I cried. The moment my mom hugs me, I cry. You know what I mean? And it's just her being there, you know, like, yeah.
I think that's so impactful, and what I hear, that being there for kids, for if when we were young, that would feel like establishing trust.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to highlight that it takes more than having a title of a parent for trust to be established.
Yep.
Sometimes we assume if we're doing everything that we can to provide, financially, or providing food or shelter, then that's enough. But it really doesn't complete that trust in our children. And so if we could learn to do what you said and take that time to just sit, be present, it helps to build that trust. And that trust allows that communication to kind of be able to be shared like it needs to if our teens or kids are dealing with those issues. So I think that's a very vital point. Minister Toya, is there anything that you want to share on trust?
I know for sure I'm like this close to my mom. And whenever I would have a conflict with my dad, I always ran to my mom. And if she was ever at the point where she was not willing to hear what I had to say, it hurt even more than him not hearing what I had to say. Yeah. Just because we had established that connection between the two of us. Some say that I was a little bit spoiled by my mom, but I think I was more spoiled by my dad. But the point was that she was there. Mm-hmm. She was available. She worked like from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the bank, and she still made time to be there. Even though my dad was difficult, because dealing with someone that abused alcohol, it can be difficult and challenging on the family, but just the fact that she was present for dinner and the fact that she was present in the morning, she made it a point to take us to school in the morning. She didn't have to, but it was the acts that she used, just to make sure that she was there. She may not have always made it to every game, and she may not have made it to every play. But when she used the time that she had, she used it wisely in terms of just hearing us out. One day, my sister said she needed her birth certificate, and she slipped and said she needed birth control. We were on our way to school, and we were all like, and my mom said, well, if you need birth control, then let me know that too. But that stuck in my mind because it made me realize that there was no judgment there,
Right.
and that she was an available parent.
Definitely.
So that's something that is very highlights in my mind, even today, as a parent, to be available.
No judgment.
That's very important. Thank you all. This first half has been really great and informative in regards to, how can you trace back the history of how depression has started, and what are some things that our audience can do moving forward to make sure that they make different choices for their children. And so we're going to take a brief break so that we can hear from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to dive into some practical tools of how can you really have these conversations with your children to help them if they're dealing with depression or suicidal ideation. We'll be right back, y'all. We want to welcome everyone back to Overcomers Talk. We have been having a very lively conversation and a very open conversation addressing what it was like for our history, what it was like to experience what our parents went through and how that impacted our journey. I personally have kind of been sharing also, so I'm putting myself into this equation. But I want to thank Victor and Tamara for just being so open, and Minister Latoya. We all, at some point, many of us have dealt with depression, is what we're kind of realizing, or some form of sadness. And so with this next part of the conversation, we really wanted to kind of switch gear and really talk more so about our children, especially especially now with COVID and how this has impacted the mental health and led to an increase, we heard that last week, an increase in depression and suicide ideation among our youth. We want to talk a little bit more about the fears that this has instilled in parents. So I'll kind of maybe word it this way. What are some of the fears that exist that you may be experiencing dealing with how society is now for our kids, Victor?
I think the biggest fear for me is understanding the generational gap or the generational differences. I tell my kids all the time that they're the part of the generation that wants the independence, but they don't know everything. So when they fail, they want you to help them, but you can't tell them how to help. You know what I'm saying? Like, so they're complicated as all get out, and it's confusing. So, and then we were talking about, just, growing up with your kids, having kids at a young age. My oldest son and my oldest daughter, they kind of grew up with me. So, like I was saying, they had the unpolished or the uneducated version of Vic, right? So, with my younger kids, it's a lot more understanding. It's a lot more principles and things that I've learned over time that I can apply in their lives. So the fear for me is these I call them the lost generation. A lot of these kids, they're so influenced by social media. What social media say is law. What their friends think is more important than the reflection that they see in the mirror. So with this whole concept of them being just kind of lost and out there stuck in the World Wide Web, you can't touch them when they're inside the World Wide Web because it's not reality to them. So when they actually have to deal with reality, they lack the tools and the resources to actually deal with truth, the things that are solid that they can touch in front of them because they live so much in this electronic, fiber optic world. You know what I'm saying? So and I asked my 12-year-old one day, do you understand the difference? He wasn't 12 at the time. But I asked him, do you understand the difference between reality and virtual reality? And he really didn't understand the difference because the virtual reality world is so real to him. And I think this generation, they're so stuck in it that we have to find our ways to actually connect with them more than just talking and trying to beat things into them. We actually have to reach them and be creative on how we connect with our kids.
Yeah, that's so good. I, as an occupational therapist, I just love the way you phrase that because when our youth, when they lose touch of reality, when they lose touch of what it feels like to experience normal feelings, whether it be pain, whether it be enjoyment, whether it be happiness, they don't get to experience that from the virtual world that they live. When they're doing video games, they think that's happiness, but to truly experience their feelings and to be able to understand that, it takes having one-on-one conversations, but it also takes doing things that engage the senses, whether that be learning what your children like, hobbies that they may enjoy, experiences that they've never done before, sights that they may want to see. Those are such practical things, but they're important for our youth to be able to get that connection, to be able to generate appeasing their sight, their hearing, their sense of taste, their sense of smell. You have to really think about those when we talk about touching in or tapping into our youth.
I mean, it's like, and I kind of meet them halfway. I'm not a video gamer, right? But all of my kids love video games. So when they're down here for the summer, I give them time where we can play video games, right? And I actually learned how important it is to them. So by me learning how important, even if I disagree with it, again, it's an opportunity for me to talk to them again and show them a different side of dad that's not suits and ties and the plays and the movies and stuff like that. We're connecting now. And I'm whipping them, right? I'm beating them in the games. But then every once in a while, they might beat me. And they're cheering, man. It's all my kids cheering against dad. They high-fiving and stuff. And I take it, right? I'm like, oh, man, they're really excited about this. But then the flip side is, okay, after we do that, you're going to help me in the kitchen cook because I love to cook. So you're going to meet me in my comfort zone, and then we're talking, right? They're learning how to cook. I'm having them taste it. I'm teaching them about, again, expanding their palate and stuff. It's not just chicken nuggets and French fries, right? We're stuffing salmon and making, pastas and stuff like from scratch, and they're enjoying it, right? And some of them just like, okay, it's done, it's over with, and you can see where I connect with the other kids, and they're really enthused by it. So again, it's about being creative, like you said, and tap into all their senses.
Yeah, and teaching them life
Teaching them.
skills. Those are things that they'll be able to take into their future, and it builds their confidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
It builds their ability and I can do. And a lot of times you're going to initially probably get, because if you probably will ask, hey, do you want to kind of cook? You're probably going to get a no. But unless you really, I love the approach that you shared, where you talked about allowing them to bring you into their space without judging what they were doing, but then making it a win-win. Okay, now that we've done that, now it's time to kind of, engage in this and not judging that, but making an experience that they, kind of want to engage so they're not upset and kind of turned off or shut down along that process. So thank you for sharing that.
Definitely.
What about you, Tamara?
I think that's awesome what you said, because that's kind of similar to the approach I took with my children. I just show up in their room. I'll just come and sit in the floor and just watch them. I'm not really good at the whole video thing. I can't get my fingers together. My twin brother has been beating me in video games since I've been alive, so I'm not good at them. But I will go and I'll just sit and I'll watch them play, and I'll ask different questions about, okay, what's this and why is he doing the dance? Fortnite. What is that all about? And then, every now and then I'll pop in a question. So how was your day? And I'll do little things like say, and then we love game night. That's another big thing in my house. We love game night. So we find interactive games. My kids really love charades. And so like things like that, movie night. Those are like Friday night is like our designated game or movie night. You know what I mean? And so like doing little things like that and making sure we're getting that time. But we start that off with just having a conversation. We just started off just sitting and we're talking. Yeah. You know what I mean? They know the first 45 minutes, we're just going to talk. So it's either I'm going to open up and I'm going to tell mama whatever I need to tell her, and then creating that space to where there's no judgment. Yeah. Like I when I first implemented it, this is new for me because I'm learning to communicate as a parent. That's something we don't want to talk about, is that sometimes as parents, we have to learn how to communicate. And for me, growing up in a household where silence and internalizing things was kind of what I was taught, I had to learn how to communicate, and I had to learn it as a parent, And so when I started out with my children, implementing these things, it was very awkward, you know what I mean? And I was the queen of disclaimers. Okay, guys, this is what we're doing. Okay, the queen of disclaimers. And so my kid, what I started out by telling him is like, hey, this is the 45 minutes where you can say whatever you need to say, however you need to say it. I don't care how it sounds, because I don't want to stifle their voices. I want them to know that sometimes there are moments when something is so heavy on you, it's just important to get it out. Mm-hmm. And we'll address the tone and the way it came out later. We'll address that later. But right now, I just want you to get it out, because I want you to know you have a voice and what you have to say and how you feel matters. So just get it out. Now, if we have to come back later in a private conversation and address that tone and address them word choices, we'll get there. You know what I mean? But I need you to just get it out right now, So, yeah.
You said some really great things in there, so I just want to backtrack a little bit. So much. Let's start with the approach. I know you talked about the first thing you do is learning to kind of communicate, but what I heard, even before the communication happened, it was the being able to welcome you into that space and to be quiet, to just make the time to enter so that your presence had a little bit of time to sink in. Yeah. For some of our youth, that's so important because if you are there and you start the communication, you're going to be shut down initially because that safety, that welcomeness has not been granted. Yeah. And even if there's some hesitation, just by sitting there, there's this safety in saying this person is here. Our kids take time to process that, and we allow our kids to have that before we dive into even the, how is your day? We may seem like, that's where we want to get to, but as parents, we have to slow down and do what you said initially, Vic. We have to look with our, listen with our eyes so we can assess where they're at, the hesitation they may feel, and give them the space to kind of calm down, let their anxieties calm down, let the tension calm down, let them accept us into their space before we start even those basic conversations with them.
Absolutely.
The other thing that you said that I thought was really good, and I just wanted to highlight it, is we have to unlearn unhealthy habits. Yeah. So even though sometimes we feel, well, this is all I know, or this is how I was raised, that may not be the right way, especially when we're dealing with our youth who are dealing with depression and suicide ideation. We don't want to repeat the same habits. We don't repeat the same patterns. And in order for that to happen, we have to pause and learn and teach ourselves, how do we establish or learn new ways to address, to communicate, to be able to relate to our youth in this time and age without pushing them away.
Yeah.
What? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, I was just about to hit on that because this is a different world. I mean, we may think, oh, well, I wasn't a kid that long ago, but this is a completely different world that they live in now. And I think removing the mindset, well, when I was a kid, but you're not a kid in this reality. You don't have to deal with the social norms of today as a child. Back then, we could go outside at a certain hour at night and feel comfortable. Now it's not the same, but we have to put on that mindset that we're not dealing with our time. We're dealing with their time as their children, not as back in, I'll say 80s, for me, when we were kids and, our doors weren't locked at night. We're dealing with a completely different generation. I heard what you said about the virtual reality, and it's like a completely different universe for them now. They see things in Sims, not always in reality. So we have to put that mindset on too and gear ourselves up to say, you know what, I have to step out of myself, out of my comfort zone, and recognize that I'm not dealing with me. I'm dealing with them in their time.
Definitely. Growing up, again, like you said, I'm an 80s baby as well. 83, right? But yeah, it was definitely a different world. But I so love what Tam said about letting them express themselves. And then if I have to redirect later on, I tell my kids all the time, have your voice. I understand that there's a difference between you cursing at me. I'm just use that because I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, right? So I know there's a difference between you cursing at me and expressing yourself using these particular words. I'm not going to encourage it, right? But in this moment, if this is how your expression comes out, I have to sit back and let you get it out. I can't tell you how to communicate, right? Because I want you to communicate. So if I'm telling you how to communicate and I'm chastising you for the way you're communicating, then I'm judging you, and that destroys the trust.
Yeah.
Because trust has to be definite. It can't be circumstantial. Like if I want you to trust me, I have to let you just be who you are and me working that. So if my child decides that he or she wants to use some expressive words that I may not agree with.
Colorful
words, thank you. I have to let it out. Yeah. But growing up, that's not happening, right? Growing up, I had to ask for permission, right? Sometimes, Mom, can I say this word, please? And then she'd be like, yeah, go ahead, boy. And I'll say it. But in my grandmother, it was no happenings, right? My father, it was no happenings. Certain elders in the family, if for some reason they caught you expressing yourself in that way, it was a complete shutdown. So that leads you to close yourself out, and you're saying them in your head still. And I don't understand why parents believe it. They're saying it in their heads already, right? So what's the difference between them expressing it verbally if they're already saying it in their heads? But when it's in their heads, it's actually consuming them, right? Because they want to get it out, and they want to get it out the best way they know how, but they can't, so it stays here. And for me, that's what led to depression. Because everything I feel here, I can't say. So I get full, and I feel from the top, bottom, from the bottom up, from the middle, both ways I expand, and I explode, right? So you had to let them get it out and do like Tam said. We're going to have a private conversation. They don't want to say, look, I know you were expressing yourself, but, expand your vocabulary a little bit more to find some synonyms.
You have to, and then as you were talking, I thought about, this generation. One of the things about, you talk about the generation gap. Our generation, I was an 80s baby, late 80s, but I was an 80s baby, okay. But about with our generation, it was very much so be seen and not heard. Right. You know what I mean? Do as I say, not as I do, But whereas this generation, no, if you do that in front of me, I'm going to do it too. Right. If you say that in front of me, I'm going to say it too. They very much so want their voices heard. And so for you to try to you're not going to just take their voice. They're going to rebel. If you try to take their voice, they're going to rebel. They're going to shut down. They're going to isolate. They're going to go down a path you don't want them to go. So we want to create an environment for this generation to feel like they have a voice. Yeah. Now, if I create that environment, I created the environment. So because I created the environment, I allow you to flow how you need to flow in them. But then I also have the ability to direct you in that environment.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I gave space for you to be free. I also gave space to correct the things that need to be corrected.
Definitely.
You know, we don't have to take the harsh approach that our parents took. You know, we can take, that was one of the biggest things I had to unlearn was I don't whoop my children. I don't. That didn't work. It didn't work for me. I try not to yell at my children. My children don't respond well to raising your voice. I had to learn my children. But I grew up with, you got a spanking, you did this, this, and this. You got a spanking, you got fussed at if you did. My children don't respond to that. My children do not respond well to spankings and things like that. So I had to learn how to discipline my children. This generation is different. They're not us. So we have to figure out how to discipline, but still affirm and not take their voice. One of the worst things you can, I hate to see a child flinch when a parent is about to. You don't want to
Brushing
teach
their
them
hair.
that. Yeah, you don't want to teach them that. You know what I mean? You want to teach them to have strong voices, but to be disciplined in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what you talked about, unlearning those unhealthy habits and really recognizing the child that we have in front of us.
Yeah.
And Vic, you talked about that, understanding the individualism that they show up with, and respecting that is very important. I just wanted to actually touch on a few things. For some of our kids who really don't do a good job at communicating verbally, understanding other ways of creative expression is very important. And so what that might look like, and as a life coach who coaches youth, sometimes what I encourage parents to encourage their children to do is to draw. Also, just give them a scratch pad, where they're able to draw their feelings or what they may be feeling. It's amazing the emotions that can come out through what they put on paper. There's no judgment to it, and there's a freedom to be able to kind of have that as an outlet. Journaling is also a really great way, whether that be writing to journal or actually having a recording where they're able to kind of privately record their thoughts and their feelings. That's another way. But being able to think outside the box and allow other ways. Some kids are very good with their hands, and so if you give them clay, if you give them some wood that they can build or create, if you notice that that's what they thrive in, then that's how they can kind of actually communicate or build what they're feeling, or something that symbolizes that. So really, as you guys talked about, thinking outside the box for creative expression so that kids are able to express what they're feeling is very important. The other thing that I really, before our time ran out, that I wanted to touch on, in the previous episode, before we got to the break, we mentioned community, and we mentioned at times when parents aren't able to establish that relationship, or that trust just isn't there. How do you still allow maybe a surrogate or someone else that they can trust into their lives, so that our youth could have someone to communicate? And that's vital. Whether that be a family member that you know that your youth is close to, whether that is a close friend, whether that is a mentor that is in your child's life, really identifying who that person is and being okay to connect that person to your child. If you can see that they're struggling, but they won't open up to you, there are things that they may share with that mentor or that family member that's vital. And so being able to not feel like I have to be the one to own this conversation, but recognizing when it's okay to pass that on to someone that's trusted for that youth, because the end result is you want to make sure they have who's supportive in their life. Do you guys have any comments about that when it comes to kind of community and further expanding that for your children?
I think that's like one of the most important elements of raising a kid is the village, right? I'm a football coach. I love coaching youth football. And one of the greatest things that I see is when the kid I coached 3 years ago is excelling and developing as a young man, right? Not on the football field, but just his whole total concept of being a young man. When I see that develop, I feel just as proud as if he's my son. So on the flip side to that is I allow that to be done with my son as well. And it's setting your pride aside, right? Because again, I care about the result.
Yeah.
I don't care necessarily who is giving this positive reinforcement to my son, or who is helping my son develop, because ultimately what I care about is him and not my pride. And the same thing for my daughters. I encourage all of my kids to say, hey, to find that mentor, to, attach yourself to someone who's resembling greatness or, positivity. You don't always have to find it in me, because when you're looking at me, you're going to see some other things that you may not agree with, right? And I don't want you to draw that or build a wall. You can build the perfect example by having 10 people represent different elements of your life, right? So for me, I encourage it. I implore everyone out there, allow your kids to tie themselves to successful people, people who can carry out your mission as a parent.
Tamara?
And I want to piggyback off of that. Immediately, you need to get rid of the thoughts that you are inadequate as a parent when someone has to step in and assist you with your child.
Yes.
That has been 2020. That's what 2020 was for me. Because the biggest thing that I fought with concerning my oldest son was that someone had to step in and assist me with my oldest son. And I fought it because no, I'm mama. My son's supposed to connect to me. I'm his mama. I'm the one that nurtures. I'm mama. Mama knows, but I had to accept that no, in this situation, mama is not the one that he connects to. Mama is not the one. He knows mama loves him, but he's vocal and he's open with God, Dad. And I have to allow that relationship. I have to get out of the way for his health and for his benefit. And now my son is flourishing. Now the son that I knew for the majority of his life, he's showing back up again because I had to get out of the way and allow that relationship and allow somebody else to nurture him for a season. That doesn't mean that I'm inadequate as a parent.
Right.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And you have to let that go.
Yeah, that's really good. This has been an amazing series. We're getting ready to wind it down, and I just want to thank you all for gracing us with your story and sharing with us. I'd like to, as your closing remarks, we've never go through a journey without it really impacting us to do for others, right? To inspire others. And so I would love for us to kind of close out sharing what you guys are currently doing to inspire others through your journey of what you've went through.
For me, this last 4 weeks has been eye-opening for me. I always consider myself a community servant. I think that everything we've done in theater and the films has been addressing a lot of social issues, and I thought that was it for me. But since we started this series, I started posting every day words of encouragement, and it's taken off. I have people inboxing me daily, asking me for more. So I'm giving more, and I actually started volunteer training for NAMI to become an official mental health advocate and start doing more conferences and different small and large scale events throughout Central Texas.
Awesome.
So that's working.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for that. Tamara.
And I, since we started this journey with this particular series, I have begun working on content. But as far as dealing with depression, the worshiper within, depression as it relates to the church, I am working on content. So we'll be putting some things out soon. But I also work as a vocal coach. I work with a lot of my students. Are trying to find their voice, and it's not just their physical voice or singing voice. It's also that confidence that they need working through depression, working through mental illness and anxiety, things like that. And so I am a vocal coach. And like Vic, we do work together in stage plays and theater. And so, and I write my music. I am a songwriter and singer. And so, that's kind of put my music out there, put all of it out there in the plays and things like that to encourage and to strengthen. And all of it comes from this journey. So
Beautiful. Thank you. Minister Latoya, what are your closing remarks?
I just think this has been such a phenomenal series thus far. I know just because the series is transitioning does not mean that the work needs to stop. Mental health is something that we have to constantly be aware of, be willing to confront and deal with in our community, in our church, amongst our friends and our family and those around us. And I just want to thank you both for being open to start conversations, because this conversation may have started here, but just like Mr. Vic said, it started something new in you. And I know just watching it myself, it started me thinking on how to impact others with what I may have gone through, and not being afraid of what others may think or what others may use it for, but I know that it can actually help other people. And that's so important that we keep that at the forefront, that we're actually here to be an advocate for someone else as well, not just, it's not just a overcomers talk, it's impacting lives.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
that's good. And as the audience, we want to encourage you to also continue the conversation. It takes more than one conversation to solve what's going on. It's an ongoing continuation. And so as we have made this into a 3-part series, there's a part 4 and there's a part 5, but it happens in your life. So we want to encourage you to do that. We want to also encourage you to join next week at Overcomers Talk. You will have your original host, Miss Carrie Ann, and Pastor Jeffries will be here as we continue to dive into a very important topic on Overcomers Talk in regards to breast cancer awareness. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed day.